Okay, let's unpack this. When you hear tiny home, what comes to mind for you? Is it that, picturesque cabin nestled in the woods, the one you've probably seen scrolling through Instagram?
Right, the perfect little escape.
Exactly. Or maybe it's a minimalist marvel on wheels, perfectly designed for maximum efficiency and a life on the go.
Yeah, those are the classic images, aren't they?
For many, the image conjures up simplicity, the allure of financial freedom, or even that tantalizing thought of escaping the conventional rat race.
Hmm.
But today we're diving deep into the fascinating world of tiny homes, moving far beyond just that appealing aesthetic. Our mission is to truly explore the genuine motivations behind this rapidly growing movement, its surprising societal potential, and yes, the very real challenges and complex politics involved in embracing such a tiny footprint.
And what's truly fascinating here is how much more there is to tiny homes than meets the eye. It's not just a trend, really. It's a phenomenon with layers.
Layers, good word.
Yeah. We'll be looking at how they're rigorously defined by building codes that's important and why people are truly drawn to them. What drives that profound mindset shift and, crucially, how they fit into the bigger picture. Housing solutions, sustainability efforts, even community development.
And we're drawing on quite a bit of research for this, right?
We are. We're pulling insights from a rich stack of sources, everything from academic research and insightful lifestyle articles to critical analyses of legislative documents. So it's going to be a pretty comprehensive exploration, we hope. One that truly opens up your understanding of this multifaceted movement.
I think that's essential because the term tiny home gets thrown around a lot and it can mean different things to different people. So let's kick things off by getting on the same page. What exactly is a tiny home? Because, as it turns out, there's a very specific definition that guides much of the conversation around regulation and acceptance.
That's a crucial starting point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When we talk about a tiny home in a formal sense, especially in the U.S., we often refer to the definition provided by the 2018 International Residential Code, specifically Appendix Q.
Okay, Appendix Q. Got it.
Right. And this code specifies a tiny home as a dwelling unit with a maximum of 400 square feet of floor area. And it's really important to note a specific detail here. That measurement excludes any lofts.
Oh, that's interesting. So the sleeping loft doesn't count against the limit.
Exactly. So when you see those charming loft bedrooms or storage spaces, they don't count towards that 400 square foot limit, which, in practice gives you a bit more functional space than you might initially assume.
Right. Makes sense.
The core concept behind this isn't just about small size, though. It's what's called compact architecture.
Compact architecture. I like that term.
Yeah, it's not just a buzzword. It means that every single square inch is designed with intention, often serving multiple purposes. It almost forces you to rethink how you live and what you truly need. It's efficiency at its most creative, really.
Whether these spaces are serving as someone's full-time home or maybe just a unique vacation spot.
Precisely. Permanent residence or unique vacation accommodation, the principles apply.
That concept of compact architecture really resonates. I mean, we're talking about clever design solutions that make the absolute most of every corner, right? It's not just smaller, it's, smarter.
Precisely. It's about making every square meter count, integrating multi-purpose furniture.
Yeah.
The sofa that becomes a bed, the table that folds away, and employing strategic organization from the ground up.
Like those staircases with drawers built in.
Exactly like that. This leads to layouts that are inherently more efficient and, frankly, more livable. Imagine a sofa that transforms into a dining table, or like you said, a staircase with built-in storage, or a bed that lifts effortlessly to reveal hidden storage. These aren't just clever tricks, they're crucial design choices for making such a compact space truly functional, comfortable, and in many ways, surprisingly spacious for daily living.
So, given all this clever design, are all tiny homes the same? Are they always on wheels, like the ones we often see on TV shows? Or do they come in different forms? Because I mostly picture the ones on trailers.
That's a great question, and it highlights a common misconception. There's actually a wide range of tiny home types, each offering different advantages and fitting different lifestyles. On one hand, you have the mobile variants.
Okay, the ones on wheels.
Right. These are the homes explicitly built on wheels, or a robust construction trailer chassis. They offer what's referred to as extreme flexibility, making them ideal for those who want the freedom to change their location without having to pack up their entire life or buy a new house.
Like picking up and moving with the seasons.
Exactly. Imagine picking up your home and literally moving it from a snowy mountain retreat to a sunny beachside spot, or following a job opportunity across state lines. It's incredibly liberating for those who prioritize mobility.
That does sound incredibly liberating. A house that travels with you? Wow.
It truly does offer that. But then on the other side, you have the permanently installed variants.
So fixed in place.
Yes, these are fixed in one location, either on a traditional plot of land with a foundation, maybe a slab or piers, or more commonly, within designated tiny house communities.
Okay, like a little neighborhood of tiny homes.
Exactly. And these offer a stable, long-term living solution and can showcase incredible architectural diversity. They're not always simple rectangular boxes. They can be custom-designed structures that blend seamlessly into their surroundings, perhaps with unique roof lines, multiple levels, or distinctive exterior finishes, really quite varied.
And these communities, they're not just tiny houses.
Not always.
Mhm.
Tiny house communities themselves can be quite diverse. They might include a mix of these tiny houses on wheels, maybe some more traditional RVs, park model homes, which are sort of like larger RVs meant for longer stays trailers, and even microhomes that might be slightly larger than that 400s QF definition.
Interesting mix.
What often unifies these communities, though, is that they coalesce around a shared purpose or philosophy, which is a key differentiator from, standard suburban subdivisions.
Right, the intention behind it. I can just imagine some of these designs. Our sources mention things like a luxury chalet model that manages to pack a cozy double bed, a handcrafted kitchenette, and a modern bathroom, all within just, 215 square feet?
That's right.
That's a masterclass in spatial efficiency. It truly makes you rethink what's genuinely essential in a living space.
It absolutely does. And that rethinking, that challenge to conventional notions of space, leads us perfectly into the why of tiny living. It's not just about fitting your life into a small footprint. It's about a complete mindset shift that goes far beyond square footage.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This isn't just a fleeting trend that comes and goes with the latest design fad. The sources describe tiny house living profoundly as more than just a trend. It's a fundamental mindset shift towards, minimalism, sustainability, and true intentionality.
Intentionality is a key word there.
Yeah. It's not merely about having a smaller footprint, but a profound reevaluation of what genuinely matters in life. People are making a conscious decision to downsize from traditional houses, which requires not only practical considerations like, decluttering everything, but also a significant psychological adjustment.
Oh, huge.
It challenges deeply ingrained societal norms that equate success with size, our materialistic tendencies, and even our personal comfort zones.
That's right. And when we look at surveys of tiny house enthusiasts, and there have been quite a few, several key motivations consistently rise to the top. They paint a really clear picture of this intentional shift.
What's number one?
The most frequently cited reason for going tiny is unequivocally financial security and freedom.
No surprise there, I guess.
Not really. But it's not just about saving a bit of money. It's about drastically reducing and often completely eliminating debt, particularly the burden of a large mortgage.
Right, the 30-year anchor.
Exactly. By spending less on housing, which is the largest expense for most households, individuals liberate an enormous amount of resources. Money that would otherwise be tied up in mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, huge utility bills.
Freeing up cash flow.
Tremendous cash flow. This financial freedom then allows individuals to pursue other passions, maybe travel extensively, reduce their work hours, invest in experiences rather than things. It's a powerful way to regain control of one's financial destiny.
So it's a conscious decision to actively opt out of the conventional financial treadmill that so many people feel trapped on, like, I'm not playing that game anymore.
Precisely. That's a big part of the philosophy.
Yeah.
And hand in hand with that is the strong desire for simple living and minimalism.
Getting rid of stuff.
A powerful urge to live with less and avoid the endless accumulation of unneeded possessions. It connects directly to broader philosophical movements that question consumerism. For many, it's a deliberate act of paring down, keeping only what truly serves a purpose or brings genuine joy.
The Marie Kondo effect, but for your whole life.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's freedom and autonomy. This refers to the profound ability to, if your house is mobile, move it when you choose. But even if it's fixed, it's the ability to design and control your own space, often build with your own hands, and to live outside the conventional norms of traditional housing. It's about cultivating self-sufficiency and having a greater degree of control over one's daily life, free from the dictates of a large property and all its upkeep.
And I imagine environmentalism plays a huge, perhaps foundational role here too. It seems like such a natural fit.
It absolutely does. Environmentalism and sustainability are major drivers for a significant portion of tiny home dwellers. They are often deeply committed to reducing their impact on the planet, aiming for a significantly reduced carbon footprint.
It makes sense. Smaller house, smaller footprint.
Intrinsically, yes. And this isn't just an abstract idea. It manifests in very practical ways. You see a strong interest in living off-grid, maybe using solar panels for energy independence, collecting rainwater, using composting toilets, engaging in various other eco-friendly behaviors that are often made more challenging or just more expensive in larger, more conventional homes.
It also seems to foster connections, right? I keep hearing about the community aspect. There's a strong emphasis on community and shared values in the sources.
Yes, definitely. There's often a profound desire for meaningful relationships and community. Many tiny home enthusiasts actively seek to foster a sense of community by living alongside other like-minded individuals, people who share their values regarding simplicity, sustainability, intentional living.
Finding your tribe, so to speak.
Exactly. This shared experience creates a supportive environment where people genuinely connect, share resources, maybe tools, a lawnmower, that kind of thing, and help one another out. And finally, the lifestyle often enables more new experiences and meaningful activities.
Because you have more time and money.
Largely, yes. With reduced financial burdens and often more free time, less house to clean, less yard work, tiny home residents report being able to travel more, pursue creative hobbies, volunteer, or just engage in other passions that bring them greater fulfillment than, perhaps, managing a large house did.
So it's far more than just practical choices about square footage then. It sounds like there are deep philosophical underpinnings to all of this, almost a blueprint for a different kind of life.
Indeed. The tiny house mindset draws heavily from several specific philosophical movements. And what's fascinating is how these ideas aren't just concepts. They become the daily operating system for many tiny home residents.
Like what, specifically?
Well, minimalism is a core one, obviously advocating for living with only what is truly essential, quality over quantity. Then there's voluntary simplicity, which encourages a less consumer-driven lifestyle, focusing on non-materialistic values and finding contentment in what you have, not what you acquire. Environmentalism is huge, driving the desire for reduced resource consumption and a smaller ecological footprint. And then there's anti-consumerism, which actively challenges the societal pressure to constantly acquire more possessions, seeing it as an endless, unfulfilling cycle.
It almost sounds a bit Thoreauvian, like Walden.
You know, it's interesting you say that. There are definitely threads that connect to Henry David Thoreau's transcendentalism, particularly his emphasis on self-reliance, simple living, and that deep, direct connection with nature.
Living deliberately.
Exactly. These influences collectively underscore that tiny home enthusiasts often prioritize freedom, personal values, and sustainability over material excess and conventional definitions of success. It's a powerful cocktail of philosophies that coalesce in a very tangible, very small space.
So it's a full philosophical package, a living laboratory where these ideas become tangible. And that leads us to a really important question. Can this personal choice actually scale up? Can it help solve bigger societal problems? Can tiny homes be a potential solution to grand challenges like, say, housing shortages and even homelessness?
This is where tiny homes transition from being solely an individual lifestyle choice to something that, as the sources put it, could be used for, especially from a societal and political standpoint. It's a broader vision beyond just personal preference or escaping the rat race.
Okay, how so?
Well, our sources highlight that housing shortages aren't just an urban problem. They're significantly impacting rural areas as well. These rural housing crises are often exacerbated by poverty, and they lead to numerous interconnected issues. Health barriers, lack of access to nutritious food, limited educational opportunities, sometimes substandard medical care, or even just difficulty accessing emergency services because there's no stable address.
So a cascade of problems stemming from unstable housing.
Right. And in these contexts, tiny homes could provide a genuinely viable, accessible, and dignified housing option. It could be a critical step towards stability for many people in rural areas.
So it's about more than just providing a roof. It's potentially addressing systemic issues that stem from housing insecurity in different environments.
Exactly. And the potential impact extends powerfully to urban areas too, particularly in addressing the pervasive issue of homelessness. Specifically, the concept of tiny home villages has emerged as a promising answer for sheltering the homeless population in our cities.
Tiny home villages, not just scattered homes, but actual communities.
Yes. These aren't just isolated units. They're intentionally designed communities, often with shared resources like kitchens or bathrooms, community gardens, meeting spaces, and crucially, a supportive environment with access to social services.
What are the practical advantages that make them so suitable for this kind of intervention, especially compared to, say, larger shelters or traditional affordable housing projects, which can take forever to build?
Well, first and foremost, they are incredibly cost-effective compared to constructing average homes or even large-scale institutional shelters. Significantly cheaper.
Okay, budget matters.
Absolutely. This makes them a more feasible solution for nonprofit organizations or local governments operating on limited budgets, allowing them to stretch resources further and help more people. Secondly, there's the remarkable ease and speed of construction.
They go fast.
They can, yes. Tiny homes are often a type of modular construction, meaning components can be prefabricated off-site and then assembled quickly on-site. They're relatively easy to put up quickly.
Which is huge in a crisis.
It's a massive advantage, yes. It allows for rapid deployment. It also means individuals might be able to participate in the build DIY aspects, though safety and code compliance are absolutely paramount. Or, crucially, it enables local government organizations or nonprofits to create entire tiny home villages within a reasonable budget and time frame that traditional housing construction often just can't match.
And it's not just about cost and speed, is it? There's something about dignity and safety which often get overlooked in discussions about homelessness solutions. Providing a small, personal, lockable space seems like it would make a huge difference psychologically.
Precisely. Providing dignified, livable, and importantly, up-to-code housing for low-income individuals, even in central city locations, can significantly reduce those risks and create safer city populations. It shifts the paradigm from temporary, often unsafe, encampments or crowded shelters to structured, supportive communities where individuals have their own secure space, a locking door, a sense of personal territory and ownership.
A sense of place.
Exactly. While tiny homes aren't a cure-all for all the complex social issues a country faces, it's clear that with intention and proper planning, these homes and communities can make it easier to manage some of the significant social and economic issues of our time. And this leads naturally to another major benefit we touched on, their environmental advantages.
Right, because beyond the potential societal impact, living tiny inherently seems to come with environmental benefits, like that reduced carbon footprint. When we're talking about tangible pro-environmental behaviors that are often central to the lifestyle, almost by necessity, aren't they?
Indeed. The environmental motivation isn't just theoretical. It translates into concrete, daily actions for many tiny home residents. They actively engage in what researchers call pro-environmental behaviors.
Like what specifically?
Well, for example, they often prioritize buying biodegradable or recyclable products. They become acutely aware of their waste stream because, well, there's nowhere to hide it.
Right, you can't just stuff it in a giant bin.
Exactly. They strive to reduce household trash by buying less packaging, a direct challenge to our throwaway consumer culture. You'll often find them using rainwater catchment systems to conserve precious water, integrating solar panels to generate their own clean energy, striving towards living off-grid where regulations and climate allow.
Very self-sufficient.
Many also engage in composting kitchen waste, turning scraps into soil, and even growing their own food in small container gardens, vertical farms, or community plots right outside their door.
Wow. And beyond their individual homes.
There's often a strong emphasis on sharing resources within their communities. Things like appliances, tools, maybe even vehicles, reducing the overall consumption footprint of the group. And in terms of transportation, they might actively choose to bike instead of drive, especially if the community is located thoughtfully. It all adds up to reducing carbon emissions.
So the very design and the small scale of the home itself encourages these behaviors. That idea of every square meter having a purpose means you have to be really thoughtful about what you bring in, how you live, what you consume.
Absolutely. The intentional design of tiny homes necessitates things like open concept layouts, multi-purpose furniture, strategic organization. This isn't just aesthetic, it fundamentally shapes a more efficient and sustainable way of living.
Yeah.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, tiny homes aren't just about saving money or simplifying life. They're a deliberate move towards a more sustainable existence. They potentially offer a multi-pronged approach to tackling massive issues like climate change and housing inequality. It's a powerful combination of personal values driving collective action.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there?
Always.
For all this idealism and potential, it's not all sunshine and perfect eco-living. There are some very real hurdles that tiny home enthusiasts face, right? This is the reality check part of our dive.
You're right. We absolutely need to talk about the reality check because for all the idealism, there are significant challenges, especially on the legal and regulatory front. It sounds like a real maze out there for anyone trying to go tiny, almost like the law hasn't caught up to the movement at all.
A maze is a good word for it.
It truly is a labyrinth.
Hmm.
A major drawback, as our sources strongly point out, is that in many areas of the U.S., for example, tiny homes are illegal to own or reside in full-time. Flat out illegal sometimes.
Really?
Just
Just illegal?
Yes. Or even if they're not outright illegal, they're subject to strict zoning laws that can make it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to place and live in one legally. These laws were often written decades ago with traditional, much larger single-family homes in mind, and they simply don't account for the unique footprint or classification of a tiny home, especially one on wheels.
So minimum square footage requirements, things like that.
Exactly. Minimum square footage requirements, rules about foundations, utility hookups where RVs can be parked long-term. It's a minefield. Even for fixed tiny homes, the ones on foundations, typically a building permit must be obtained in advance in most cases. And that can be a complex, lengthy, and expensive process, often requiring adherence to building codes designed for much larger structures, which doesn't always make sense.
And it's even tougher elsewhere.
It can be. It's worth noting that construction laws and zoning are often considerably stricter in Europe compared to the U.S., adding another layer of complexity for those looking to build internationally or even draw inspiration from European designs.
So people often have to get pretty creative to circumvent these rules sometimes, don't they? Almost like playing a game of legislative chess or hide and seek.
They do, and it really speaks to the determination within the movement. One common tactic mentioned is to classify the tiny home as a recreational vehicle, an RV, or to use campsites or RV parks as a long-term location. But even then,
There are catches.
big catches. Specific regulations tied to individual states must be adhered to, and often individual counties or cities have their own rules too. These often limit how long you can stay in one spot, maybe 30 days, maybe 180 days, or what kind of amenities you can legally connect to. It's definitely not a free pass.
Wow.
This highlights how much the legal landscape varies dramatically from county to county, city to city, state to state. It creates this confusing patchwork of regulations that can be incredibly frustrating and time-consuming to navigate.
But you mentioned some places are adapting.
Yes. Thankfully, it's not all roadblocks. Some forward-thinking local governments are actually starting to adapt and see the potential benefits, particularly for affordable housing. Our sources point to examples like the city of Portland, Oregon. They deprioritized enforcement of the city's zoning code to allow the siting of temporary tiny homes in specified locations, specifically as a strategy to address their homelessness crisis.
So looking the other way a bit for a good cause.
Kind of, yeah, a pragmatic approach. It shows a willingness, at least in some places, to experiment with practical solutions and adapt old rules to new realities and pressing needs.
It really makes you wonder, what if policies were different across the board? If the regulatory hurdles were eased or specifically adapted for tiny homes, the potential seems truly immense.
The sources strongly suggest that if regulations were more accommodating and forward-thinking, it could potentially solve several major social issues, from housing affordability crises to providing dignified shelter for vulnerable populations.
Yeah.
It underscores the idea that the current restrictions are a significant barrier to wider adoption and societal benefit, effectively stifling a promising solution in many places.
So the legal stuff is huge. But beyond the legalities, there are also the very personal and social challenges of adapting to this lifestyle that can be just as significant, right? It's not just about finding a place to park it.
Absolutely not. Moving into a tiny home is a huge personal shift. It takes time, I imagine, to truly adjust to living in, say, 200 or 300 square feet. It requires a significant shift in how you perceive personal space, storage, and functionality.
Yeah, I can only imagine how you'd have to rethink every single object you own and every daily routine. Where does the laundry hamper go?
Exactly. Those open concept layouts, multi-purpose furniture, strategic organization, they aren't just design trends. They become absolutely essential for daily living. You have to be organized. This adjustment takes time and patience, requiring a disciplined approach to possessions. For many, though, with a mindset focused on efficiency and comfort, it can indeed be a remarkably liberating experience in the end, forcing a focus on what truly matters.
But getting there, that downsizing process sounds emotionally intense.
Oh, it really can be. Then there's the profound emotional journey of downsizing. For many people, letting go of sentimental items can feel like losing a part of yourself. It's not just decluttering, it's a deep emotional process. You're reevaluating what holds value, confronting memories tied to objects, deciding what you truly need versus what you're holding on to out of habit or obligation or sentimentality.
How do people cope with that?
Well, our sources suggest practical strategies like digitizing photographs and important documents to save physical space while preserving those cherished memories. It's about finding new ways to cherish what's important without the physical clutter taking up precious square footage.
And it's not just an internal battle, is it? There are external pressures, aren't there? From friends, family, society at large, maybe people wondering why you'd live in a shed.
Yes, definitely. There's the pervasive challenge of overcoming social norms and expectations. Our society often equates success with large homes, multiple cars, accumulating stuff. So choosing to live in a tiny house might come with external pressures or misconceptions from friends and family.
Judgment.
Sometimes, yeah. People might question your choices, assume you're struggling financially when maybe you're thriving, or just not get it. It can feel isolating if your circle doesn't understand.
So what helps?
Developing confidence in your own decision, being clear on your why, and crucially, aligning with a community of like-minded individuals. Finding other tiny dwellers, either online or in person, can really reinforce the choice to prioritize freedom and sustainability over material excess. It provides that social support needed to confidently pursue an unconventional path.
That community aspect again. And the sources advise trying before you buy, right?
Yes, practical preparation is key. They emphasize advice like start decluttering early, way before you think you need to, and even try living in a smaller space before moving, if possible. Rent an RV, stay in a tiny house hotel, test your adaptability before making the full commitment.
Good advice. Don't just dive in headfirst without a test run. Now let's talk about who actually is making this dive, because the research reveals a rather surprising homogeneity in the demographic profile of tiny home enthusiasts. This is where the story gets a bit more nuanced, maybe even uncomfortable.
This is a really interesting and frankly somewhat unexpected finding from the research studies we looked at. The average tiny house enthusiast, based on extensive survey data across multiple studies, is primarily described as a white, middle-aged, college-educated female who makes a household income of about $62,500 a year.
Wow, that's specific.
It is. One prominent study, for instance, found that nearly 97% of its participants were white, with 60% being college-educated. Approximately 40% of them were aged between 40 and 66 and earned over $60,000 annually. This profile is remarkably consistent across various academic investigations mentioned in our sources. It's not just one study saying this.
So it's not as diverse ethnically or socioeconomically as one might assume, especially given the movement's potential to address housing affordability and homelessness. There's almost an irony there, isn't there? Using it as a solution for poverty, but mainly adopted by the middle class.
There is, and it's a critical point for reflection. This homogeneity of demographics and somewhat exclusive nature is actually quite striking. It runs parallel, interestingly, to similar findings in co-housing communities, another form of intentional living. Studies there have shown, for example, that 95% of residents are of European descent and 80% are university educated.
Huh. So intentional communities tend to attract a similar demographic.
It appears so based on this data. And this raises an important, maybe tough question. Given the stated potential for tiny homes to address critical issues like poverty and homelessness, why does the movement, at least in its current visible form, appear to be dominated by such a specific demographic?
Yeah.
What might this mean for its broader impact and its ability to truly be a widespread solution for diverse populations?
Yeah, what are the barriers? Is it cost, even though they're cheaper? Is it the legal navigation? Is it cultural factors?
It could be all of those things. It's something worth reflecting on because it complicates the narrative of tiny homes as a universal solution. It suggests there might be unseen barriers, or perhaps that the movement hasn't yet effectively reached or catered to a wider range of people.
That's a powerful question, and it really complicates the narrative a bit, highlighting a potential paradox within the movement. But it also leads us to explore another fascinating aspect of tiny living that might hold some answers, or at least more complexity: the power of community. Because even with this demographic profile, the concept of tiny house communities seems to be a significant driving force, almost a rebirth of older concepts like co-housing.
Absolutely. Tiny house communities are essentially neighborhood-style groupings that embody the very principles of intentional community. This isn't just about sharing a fence line or common driveway. It's about a conscious decision to live together with shared values, mutual support, and often shared facilities like common houses or gardens.
Intentional community.
Exactly. And our sources clearly position tiny house communities as a modern rebirth of third-wave co-housing within the United States, building on and evolving from previous iterations of that idea.
So co-housing has been around for a while then. This isn't a brand new idea that just sprang up with the tiny home movement itself.
Not at all. It's an evolution of communal and cooperative living concepts that date back decades, really. The first wave of co-housing emerged primarily in Europe, particularly in places like Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands, starting way back in the late 1960s.
Okay, what was their focus?
This first wave was truly focused on radically reimagining how people might live in community. There was a strong emphasis on shared housework, promoting female empowerment by alleviating some of the domestic burdens traditionally placed solely on women, and deliberately breaking the perceived isolation of the nuclear family. The goal was to establish community-driven childcare, shared meals several times a week, and mutual support systems that benefited everyone. Very idealistic, very communal.
And how did that evolve when it came to the U.S., where perhaps the emphasis was a bit different? Individualism is stronger here, maybe?
That's a fair point. The second wave, which primarily took root in the U.S. in the late 1980s and 1990s, reimagined these principles. It often had a more pronounced environmental focus right from the start. It also specifically aimed to address what was seen as the Americans' need for community, social support, interaction, and security in their local neighborhood, a direct response to increasing suburban sprawl and isolation.
So less radically communal, maybe more neighborhood-focused.
Exactly. Importantly, this second wave consciously moved away from what might be perceived as commune-like environments. It focused instead on creating intentional collaborative neighborhoods where individual family units maintained their privacy and ownership of their homes, but actively engaged in shared common spaces like a common house for meals and activities and collective decision-making for the community. This wave is often linked to the influential 1988 book, Co-Housing, a contemporary approach to housing ourselves, which really popularized the concept in North America.
Okay, and the third wave, where tiny homes fit in, what's its distinguishing characteristic? Seems like sustainability is even bigger now.
Yes, the third wave of co-housing has emerged more recently, primarily across the Pacific Rim, but its principles are strongly reflected in modern tiny house communities globally. This iteration places a very strong emphasis on green architecture, deep sustainability practices, think net zero energy, advanced water conservation, and significantly, it tries to address issues of affordability and accessibility within the movement, making it potentially more attainable for a broader range of people, although the demographic findings we just discussed suggest there's still work to do there.
But the core goal remains connection.
Absolutely. The shared goals across all these waves, and especially prevalent in tiny house communities, are to create a rich social environment with enhanced mutual support. This is often facilitated through those common facilities. The shared common house is almost universal, maybe a community garden, a workshop, shared laundry facility spaces deliberately designed to encourage interaction, collaboration, and collective action.
And this structure, this intentional community, brings us directly to a key sociological concept that helps us understand how these communities function and influence their residents. Social capital.
That's right, social capital.
Social capital. That's a term we hear a lot, particularly in discussions about community building, but what does it really mean in this context? How does it actually translate into something tangible within a tiny home village?
Yeah, it can sound a bit academic, but it's actually quite practical. In simple terms, social capital refers to the resources embedded in one's social networks, resources which are accessible through those social ties.
So it's about who you know and what those connections get you.
Kind of. But it's deeper than just networking. Think of it this way. Your social networks have inherent value because they provide access to resources, maybe information, maybe physical help, maybe emotional support, and also access to valued social attributes such as trust, reciprocity, and shared community values. It's not just about who you know, but the quality of those relationships, the trust that exists within them, and the tangible and intangible benefits that flow from those connections. It's knowing who to ask for help with fixing something, or having someone share vital information about, say, navigating local regulations.
Okay, so how does that play out specifically in a tiny home community where people are living so close together and often explicitly sharing resources or goals?
Well, in tiny house communities, these social networks often become incredibly important and very active, almost by design. They actively enable the sharing of knowledge and resources, especially on things like pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors, which are often central to the community's ethos.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If you're new to composting, maybe you're unsure how to start. In a tiny house community with high social capital, you can literally learn hands-on from a neighbor who has been successfully doing it for years. If someone has figured out the best way to install a rainwater catchment system that meets local codes, they can share their expertise, lend you tools, maybe even help you install it. It creates this fertile ground for learning and adopting sustainable habits much faster and more effectively than trying to figure it all out alone.
So it's almost like a knowledge-sharing hub or a feedback loop, a synergistic effect where being around others with green habits starts to influence your own actions and beliefs.
Precisely. It is theorized and, importantly, observed in research that the more centrally integrated into a community an individual is, the higher their levels of pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors are.
Centrally integrated, meaning more connected.
Yes, exactly. The more connected you are within that community's social network, the more people you know, the more you participate in community activities, the more essential you are to the flow of information and support, the more your own pro-environmental actions and beliefs will likely rise. Being surrounded by others who already exhibit high levels of pro-environmental behaviors and attitudes creates a synergistic effect, subtly but powerfully raising the surrounding members' own behaviors and attitudes.
So this raises an important question, doesn't it? Does simply being part of this connected community inherently shift your own green habits, even if you weren't, say, initially as focused on environmentalism as some of your neighbors?
The evidence suggests it truly can. That social influence, that shared norm is powerful. And another concept related to community that's potentially important here is community attachment.
Community attachment. That sounds like, well, an emotional connection, like that warm, fuzzy feeling of belonging. Is it just that, or is there a deeper sociological meaning to it beyond just liking where you live?
It's both emotional and sociological, and it can be quite powerful. Researchers define community attachment as an emotional, usually positive bond between a person and setting, or more simply, an emotional investment in place.
Okay.
In this context, it specifically refers to the bond a person feels with their specific tiny house community. This bond is built over time through shared experiences, mutual support, maybe surviving challenges together, and developing a sense of shared identity or destiny.
And how does that link to environmentalism?
Well, the theoretical link is quite strong and found in many environmental psychology studies. People tend to protect places that provide meaning to their lives, places they feel attached to. If you have a deep emotional connection to your community, and that community embodies environmental values and actively practices sustainability, you're theoretically more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors yourself, both to preserve the physical place and its social ethos. This fostering of strong feelings of belonging often promotes civic environmental activities too, things like participating in community cleanups, advocating for local green policies, protecting shared natural spaces.
That makes perfect intuitive sense. You protect what you love.
Yeah.
So with all these theories floating around, financial freedom, minimalism, community building, social capital, place attachment, what does the research actually tell us about how living in these tiny home communities specifically impacts environmentalism in practice? What did the studies find when they put these ideas to the test with real data?
Right, this is where we move from the why and the how to the what actually happens. We get into the nitty-gritty of what the empirical evidence reveals. The specific research we're drawing on here explored 3 core questions to understand the tiny home phenomenon more deeply.
What were they?
First, how does the act of living in a tiny house community actually affect the pro-environmental attitudes and behaviors of the residents? Do they become greener after moving in? Second, what is the specific role of that community integration, that social capital we talked about, in fostering these environmental attitudes and behaviors? Is being connected the key? And third, what is the role of community attachment, that emotional bond with the place in driving environmental action within these settings?
Okay, crucial questions. How did they go about answering them? What was the methodology they used to gather this information? Sounds complex.
It involves some careful methodology, yes. The study used 2 original surveys to get different perspectives. The first was a network survey administered directly to residents already living within established tiny house communities. This survey was crucial for mapping out those intricate social dynamics and connections. Who knows who talks to who about what.
Okay, the inside view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The second was a motivation survey given to tiny house enthusiasts attending tiny house festivals. These were people interested in the lifestyle, maybe planning a move, but not yet living in a community. This captured their initial motivations and attitudes before they potentially made the leap.
So a baseline group, almost.
Kind of, yeah. It helped understand their starting point. Now, to measure community integration, or social capital within the communities, the network survey used what are called name generator.
Name generator sounds like a party game.
Huh? Maybe. It's a standard social network analysis technique. It's basically asking questions like, who in the community do you typically go to for advice on environmental issues? Or who do you share tools or resources with? Or who do you spend leisure time with? By analyzing who names whom, they could map out the social structure and identify who was truly central and highly connected versus who was more on the periphery.
Okay, so you can see who the hubs are.
Precisely. The data from both surveys was then analyzed using multivariate OLS regressions. And that sounds technical.
Yeah, maybe just the gist.
Right. Think of it like this. It's a sophisticated statistical tool that lets you look at a bunch of different factors all at once. Things like someone's age, income, education, their level of community connection, how attached they feel, and see how each individual factor influences an outcome, like their environmental attitudes or behaviors, while controlling for the influence of all the other factors. It helps untangle which things are really driving the changes.
Okay, so it isolates the impact of each piece.
Exactly. It allowed them to provide robust findings about the specific drivers of environmentalism in these communities without getting bogged down in overly technical details for us here.
All right, so let's get to the juicy part, the key findings. What did the research actually reveal about attitudes, behaviors, and that community effect? Were there any surprises in the data?
There were definitely some fascinating and perhaps slightly unexpected findings. First off, what's really interesting is that tiny house enthusiasts, the people drawn to this lifestyle, often already hold very high levels of pro-environmental attitudes before they even join a community, or maybe even build their tiny house.
So they're already green to begin with?
Largely, yes. Their decision to go tiny is frequently deeply motivated by pre-existing sustainability interests, that desire to live with less, and a commitment to simple living. This initial strong commitment is crucial context for understanding the rest of the findings.
Okay, so starting point, already pretty green. What happens after they move into a community?
Well, here's where it gets nuanced. Interestingly, the research found no significant difference in pro-environmental behaviors, their actual actions after moving to a tiny home community compared to their prior living arrangements.
Wait, really? Their actions didn't get greener?
Not significantly on average, according to the study's measures. This means residents didn't drastically change their actions like recycling, composting, energy use habits once they moved into a tiny home community.
Yeah.
Likely because they were already doing a lot of those things.
Huh.
However, and this is a key distinction, there was a significant difference in pro-environmental attitudes.
Yeah.
Their beliefs and convictions did increase significantly after moving into the community.
So while their actions might not have shifted dramatically, maybe because they were already high, their beliefs and conviction about environmental issues actually strengthened. They became even more convinced about the importance of green living.
Exactly that. It's a subtle but important difference. Their commitment to the idea deepened, their environmental worldview solidified, even if their day-to-day actions were already pretty aligned. But you mentioned community integration. The social capital piece was potentially a big deal. What did the research say there about behavioral changes specifically?
Right, because the attitude strengthening is interesting, but the behavior is where the rubber meets the road, environmentally speaking.
This is truly the big one, arguably the most impactful finding of the study. The research found that residents who are centralized in community networks exhibit greater pro-environmental behaviors.
So being connected does influence actions.
Yes. This is huge. It means that the more connected and integrated an individual is within their tiny house community, the higher their social capital, the more central they are in those networks we talked about, the more they actively engage with their neighbors, the more likely they are to engage in tangible pro-environmental actions.
So it's not just what you believe necessarily, but who you interact with regularly in your tiny home community that really pushes you or supports you to act more environmentally consciously. That's a powerful social dynamic.
Exactly. The researchers theorize that higher social capital works in a few ways. It exposes individuals to more information. You learn about new techniques or products. You see diverse views. You get constant learning opportunities about pro-environmental practices just through casual interaction.
Like osmosis, almost.
Kind of. Think about it. If you're regularly chatting with neighbors at a community potluck, or attending community social evenings that maybe focus on sustainability topics, or you're participating in shared projects like building a communal compost system or a community garden, you're constantly exposed. You get practical tips for rainwater harvesting. You hear about new eco-friendly products someone tried. Maybe you have discussions about local climate action initiatives.
Right, it's just part of the air you breathe there.
Precisely. This direct social influence, this shared environment of active engagement, can profoundly shape intentions to engage in pro-environmental behaviors and strongly reinforce existing ones. Even if a community wasn't explicitly founded solely on environmentalism, these frequent interactions provide prime opportunities for learning, reinforcement, and collective action that pushes behavior forward.
Okay, so social connection drives behavior. What about community attachment, that emotional bond with the place you talked about earlier? Did that play a significant role in driving environmental behavior or attitudes in the study?
This was one of the surprising findings, actually, in this specific study. Despite those strong theoretical links you find in broader sociological and environmental psychology research,
Yeah.
community attachment was not found to be a significant predictor of either pro-environmental behaviors or attitudes within these tiny home communities.
Really? Feeling connected to the place didn't make people act greener. That seems counterintuitive.
It does seem a bit counterintuitive based on other theories, right? And this raises an important question. Why might this be the case here, when other studies do suggest a link between place attachment and pro-environmental action?
Any ideas from the research?
Well, the researchers speculate it could point to a need for maybe deeper or more nuanced measures of attachment in future research.
Mhm.
Perhaps just asking how attached do you feel isn't capturing the right dimension. Or, perhaps more likely, it might suggest that in these highly intentional, often relatively new communities, the strong, immediate, overriding influence of active social networks, the tangible benefits and influences of social capital, is simply a much more powerful and direct driver of day-to-day behavior than a more general, perhaps more passive feeling of belonging to the place itself.
So active engagement trumps passive feeling.
That seems to be what this data suggests. It implies that doing things together and talking with each other might be more impactful for shaping environmental actions in this context than just feeling an emotional connection to the shared space.
Fascinating. So the active connections are more influential than just feeling at home. Were there any other surprising predictors of pro-environmental behavior or attitudes that emerged from the research? Anything else that popped out?
Yes, the research did highlight a few other factors that showed some influence, though perhaps less dramatically than social integration. Age was found to be a significant predictor, but only slightly. Older age was associated with slightly lower pro-environmental attitudes, suggesting maybe a generational aspect, though the effect was quite subtle.
Okay, what else?
Interestingly, religion, specifically identifying as Christian, was found to be negatively associated with pro-environmental behaviors in this sample.
Negatively associated, meaning less likely to engage in those behaviors.
Yes, this finding actually aligns with some broader sociological research on environmental concern, which sometimes notes differences in environmental perspectives or reported behaviors across different religious groups or levels of religiosity. It's a complex area, but it showed up here.
Interesting. Anything positive?
Yes. On the other hand, a higher score on the Community Impact Index, which basically measured how much residents felt their community itself increased their awareness and knowledge of environmental issues, was positively and strongly associated with pro-environmental behaviors.
So if you felt the community was actively teaching you or influencing you environmentally, you acted more environmentally.
Exactly. So feeling that the community structure and interactions were actively educating and influencing environmental practices was a powerful motivator for action. It reinforces that community mechanism.
And what about things like income, education, race, gender? We talked about the homogeneity earlier. Did those individual factors predict changes after moving in?
While those broader demographic factors generally do influence overall environmental concern in the general population, this study found less pronounced direct changes in tiny home residents' behaviors or attitudes post-move that were directly attributable to these specific individual demographic factors once other things were controlled for. The primary environmental shifts observed, especially the strengthening of attitudes, seem to be driven more by the intentionality of choosing the tiny lifestyle itself. And crucially, for the enhancement of behaviors, it was really driven by those robust social dynamics, the integration within the community network.
Got it. And just to be clear, how robust are these findings? You mentioned the statistical methods, but were there checks to make sure the results weren't just flukes or skewed by, a few really unusual people in the survey?
Absolutely. Good question. The study conducted thorough diagnostic tests to ensure the reliability and validity of the findings. Standard procedure in good research. This included checking for things like univariate and multivariate outliers. Those are extreme data points either on one variable or a combination that could potentially skew the overall results. Like one person composting absolutely everything, including their furniture, might throw off the average, right? They also checked for multicollinearity. That's a statistical issue, where some of the predictor variables in the model are too highly correlated with each other, making it hard to disentangle their individual effects. For example, if everyone who was highly integrated was also highly attached, it would be hard to tell which one was really driving behavior.
So they made sure they could separate the effects.
Exactly. These rigorous checks confirm the reliability of the relationships identified, particularly that strong link between community integration, social capital, and pro-environmental behaviors and attitudes. It gives us confidence in the findings.
Okay, that's really helpful context. So wrapping this all up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? Whether you're maybe considering downsizing your own life, or you're just deeply curious about sustainable living practices, or maybe you're just interested in how communities in general shape our individual actions and beliefs. The tiny home movement offers some incredible insights. It's clearly not just a housing trend. It's a living experiment in redefining what a good life looks like, often pushing against very powerful conventional norms.
Yeah, I think this deep dive really shows us that while the Go Tiny movement is often born from deeply individual motivations, that desire for a simpler, greener, maybe more financially free life, it's the community aspect, specifically those strong social ties and active integration, that truly cultivates and amplifies pro-environmental behaviors once people are living the lifestyle. It's a powerful demonstration of how collective living and shared purpose can potentially foster greater environmental action than perhaps individual intent alone might achieve in isolation.
That's a great takeaway. Perhaps the biggest lesson from the tiny home movement isn't just about the physical size of our houses, but maybe the expansive size of our impact, both on the planet and, perhaps just as importantly, on each other within our communities. It prompts us to ask,